DragonFire, a laser that costs 10 pounds per shot, and it might just solve a problem that has been keeping Royal Navy strategists awake at night for the better part of a decade. Picture this: a small, commercially available drone, the kind you can order online for a few £100s, is flying toward a Royal Navy warship. The ship carries some of the most sophisticated air defense missiles Britain has ever built. Each one costs somewhere between several £100,000 and over £1 million. The drone costs less than a decent second-hand car. The Navy fires, the drone falls, and the Navy has spent a fortune stopping something that cost almost nothing. Now do that again, and again, and again. And somewhere inside that arithmetic sits a problem no missile stockpile in the world can solve. That is not a hypothetical. That is the strategic reality Britain's Royal Navy has been staring at for several years. And the answer, apparently, is a laser that costs 10 pounds per shot. This is the story of DragonFire. Not as a press release, not as a procurement announcement, but as a genuine solution to a genuine crisis, and why Britain is committing hundreds of millions of pounds on getting it operational by 2027. Start with the wall. Modern naval air defense grew around a particular assumption. The threat was large: fast jets, cruise missiles, anti-ship weapons traveling at supersonic speed. You build your systems to counter those, and you field ships accordingly. Britain's Type 45 destroyers, the Daring class, rank among the finest air defense platforms on the planet, and their PAAMS missile system, built around the Aster 15 and Aster 30 interceptors and directed by the Samson radar, is genuinely exceptional at what it was designed to do. But here's the thing nobody fully anticipated when those ships were conceived back in the 1990s and the early 2000s. The threat got cheap, extraordinarily cheap. The spread of small unmanned aerial systems, commercially derived drones available on the open market, has rewritten the calculus of naval threat in ways that traditional procurement cycles were never built to absorb. These are not systems requiring state-level resources to acquire or operate. Weapons like the Shahed 136, the Iranian-designed drone used extensively in recent conflicts, have demonstrated precisely how this works in practice. Relatively simple airframes, available in quantity, modified to carry small payloads and launched in swarms, dozens at a time, overwhelming point defense systems, not because any individual drone is capable, but because there are simply too many of them arriving at once. Every missile fired to stop a cheap drone is a missile no longer available for the next one, and stockpiles are finite while resupply at sea remains slow. The attacker can afford to keep sending threats far longer than the defender can afford to keep shooting them down. Military analysts call this a saturation problem, and it is anything but theoretical. The most vivid recent demonstration came in the Red Sea, where HMS Diamond, a Type 45 destroyer, was deployed against Houthi drone and missile attacks. HMS Diamond fired Sea Viper missiles drawn from the same finite stockpile that any deployed warship carries, engaging threat after threat in exactly the cost per engagement mismatch this script opened with. Navies operating in contested waters over recent years have watched exactly this dynamic play out in real time. The missiles are not the wrong answer, they are just an incomplete one, and that gap between incomplete and sufficient is where ships and crews become exposed. And it gets worse when you look at the broader picture. The Type 45 is a brilliant ship, but Britain only operates 6 of them. There is no redundancy to speak of. Every vessel degraded and its defensive capability represents a meaningful fraction of total national naval capacity, which means the saturation problem stops being a tactical inconvenience very quickly and becomes a genuine strategic vulnerability for a nation that depends on sea lanes, projects influence through naval presence, and carries treaty obligations that require ships to actually show up and be effective. So, DragonFire. The program did not arrive fully formed, and its history matters because it explains why the 2027 timeline carries the word accelerated rather than simply on schedule. Britain's consolidated investment in directed energy weapons research began taking shape in the mid-2010s, with a consortium forming around MBDA UK as prime contractor. Leonardo UK took responsibility for developing the beam director, the component that focuses and steers the laser energy onto a target. Q brought testing and development expertise to the table, and the Defense Science and Technology Laboratory, DSTL, oversaw the underlying science. September 2016 brought the first major development contract, and the ambitions attached to it were considerable. Original planning called for trials beginning in 2018, with a major demonstration targeted for 2019. Neither arrived on schedule. The pandemic caused delays across the board, technical challenges pushed milestones back further, and the program that was supposed to be showing mature capability by 2019 was still working through early trials years later. This is, worth noting in the least patronizing way possible, completely normal for a directed energy weapon program. The United States Navy reached operational deployment with its LAWS system aboard USS Ponce as early as 2014, and has since developed the more capable Helios system, now fitted to certain destroyers. But even the American programs, better resourced and longer running, have found the engineering distance between laboratory performance and reliable shipboard deployment considerable. Israel's Iron Beam program, aimed at a ground-based counter-drone and rocket roll, tells a similar story. Practically every nation attempting to develop high-powered laser systems has encountered the same pattern. The physics are well understood. The engineering is extraordinarily difficult. The distance between a system that works in a laboratory and one that works reliably on a moving ship in salt air while being used under pressure is not a small distance. Then came January 2024. At the Ministry of Defence's Hebrides range on the northwest coast of Scotland, DragonFire conducted its first high-power firing against actual aerial targets, and it worked. Britain had successfully engaged aerial targets with a high-power laser weapon for the first time, and by April 2024, the Ministry of Defense confirmed that installation on Royal Navy ships was now the direction of travel. The question was no longer whether DragonFire could perform well enough to deploy. It was when. 2 trial campaigns in 2025 answered that with unusual directness. A 6-week campaign in the first half of the year tested the system against small Class 1 unmanned aerial systems across a sustained program of engagements. A second campaign in October 2025 pushed the envelope further, testing against larger and faster targets under more demanding conditions. The detail that matters most from those October trials is this. DragonFire demonstrated the ability to track, target, and engage aerial threats flying above the horizon, meaning targets at altitude and distance beyond direct line of sight, by integrating with shipboard radar networks including the Type 45's own Samson active phased array. That is not a minor technical footnote. A system crossing that particular threshold has moved from a capable close-range tool into something genuinely different, and the program's leadership knew it. On the 20th of November 2025, Minister Luke Pollard stood at MBDA's facility in Stevenage and announced a production contract worth £316 million. The contract covered 2 DragonFire systems for 2 Type 45 destroyers, with the first ship integration targeted before the end of 2027. Britain would become the first European NATO member to field an operational shipborne laser weapon, which is the kind of sentence that tends to look better on a press release than it sounds in a procurement meeting where someone has to explain why it took this long. Now for the part that actually changes everything, what 10 pounds means in practice. A Daring-class destroyer carries a finite number of Aster missiles loaded in silver vertical launch cells. The exact figure is classified, but the logic underneath it is not. Every missile fired means 1 fewer missile available, and resupply requires either a port or a replenishment vessel at sea. In a sustained operation against a threat capable of generating drone attacks in volume, missile expenditure becomes a strategic constraint very quickly, and commanders start making decisions about when to engage that have nothing to do with the tactical picture and everything to do with the logistical one. Hold back now, preserve the stockpile, accept some risk. It is not a position any ship's captain wants to be in. The cost per engagement economics of conventional missile defense, measured in hundreds of thousands of pounds per shot against threats costing hundreds of pounds, are simply not sustainable at scale. DragonFire changes that equation from the ground up. At approximately 10 pounds per engagement, the figure confirmed in the Ministry of Defense's November 2025 announcement. The weapon fires for as long as the ship has power, and the ship generates its own power through its propulsion and electrical systems. For practical purposes, the supply of shots is not meaningfully limited. The constraint shifts from stockpile management to power generation, and power generation is a problem that naval engineering has been solving for decades. Consider the economics from the attacker's perspective for a moment. A saturation strategy using commercially available or low-cost drones rests on a straightforward assumption that the volume of threats will exceed the defender's capacity to engage them. Against a weapon that costs 10 pounds per shot and does not run out, that assumption collapses entirely. No volume of cheap drones overwhelms a system with no meaningful limit on engagements. The core logic of the saturation attack, the central tactical idea that has made low-cost drones so threatening to expensive warships, stops working. If the economics of modern naval defense are the kind of thing you find yourself thinking about, this channel covers exactly that territory, and the next story in this space is already in research. That is the arithmetic laid bare. Compelling as it is, though, there is a dimension that tends to disappear in the coverage. DragonFire, as it stands following the November 2025 contract announcement, carries the MOD's official designation of Minimum Deployable Capability. 3 words chosen with care: minimum, deployable, capability. What they communicate in practice is that the system being installed on those 2 Type 45 ships in 2027 represents a starting point, not an end point. It works, it will deploy, and it will provide genuine defensive capability from day one. But it is a first version, and the program reflects that openly. Parallel development work covers land-based applications, including potential integration on Wolfhound armored vehicles, and exploratory work is underway on fitting future variants to the GCAP next-generation combat aircraft. The phased approach is deliberate. Field something operational, learn from it under real conditions, and build from there. The broader deployment question follows directly from this. The initial contract covers 2 systems for 2 ships, while Britain's Type 45 fleet numbers 6 vessels in total. The Type 26 frigates are still under construction, with HMS Glasgow, the first of the class, not expected in service until 2028. Whether the remaining ships receive DragonFire and on what timeline depends on the defense investment plan, and on what the first operational deployments actually teach the Navy about integrating and using the system. Those are real unknowns, and anyone describing the 2027 deployment as the completion of a program rather than the beginning of one is getting ahead of the evidence. And this is where the human weight of it lands. The Royal Navy is not a large fleet by historical standards. The ships that exist carry real crews and operate in a world where the threat environment has shifted faster than procurement timelines were ever designed to accommodate. A sailor serving on a Type 45 in 2027 will stand watch on a ship carrying a weapon system that nobody on Earth has ever deployed operationally in this form before. There is no playbook drawn from other navies' experience because no other European navy has reached this point. Britain is, in this particular moment, genuinely ahead rather than catching up, which is not a sentence that gets written about British defense procurement with any great frequency. The program also carries a jobs commitment worth placing in context. 590 positions created and sustained across the UK, with 200 in Scotland, 185 in the southwest of England, and 75 in the east of England. None of those numbers transform a regional economy on their own, but they represent engineering work feeding into an industrial ecosystem built over years at MBDA's Stevenage facility, Leonardo's UK operations, and Kinetiq's testing infrastructure. You cannot build that kind of capability from scratch quickly, and the contract represents a vote of confidence in sustaining it through the production phase and beyond. Britain's Strategic Defence Review, published in June 2025, committed nearly £1 billion to directed energy weapon development across this parliament. DragonFire sits at the center of that commitment, but it is not the whole of it. The scale of the investment signals intent to establish Britain as a serious player in a field where American development has long dominated, where Israel's Iron Beam has demonstrated real operational potential in a ground-based role, and where other major powers are running their own programs in parallel. Back to where this started. The drone costs almost nothing. The missile costs a fortune. That fundamental asymmetry has been occupying a corner of naval strategic planning like an uninvited guest for the better part of a decade, and everyone in the room knew it was there. The saturation problem did not arrive quietly. It arrived with enough evidence attached, from Red Sea deployments to documented Shahed attacks on naval and commercial shipping, that ignoring it was no longer a viable option. DragonFire is not a perfect answer. Range limitations remain a factor. Line of sight constraints, even with networked sensor integration providing some extension, have not disappeared. The minimum deployable capability label is not false modesty, and there is real development work still ahead before the system reaches its full potential across the fleet. 2 ships by 2027 is not 6 ships by 2027, and the gap between those two numbers will take time and continued investment to close. What is sitting at 10 pounds per shot, firing for as long as the ship has electrical power, accurate enough to place a beam on a target the size of a 1-pound coin at a kilometer distance, is not a marginal improvement on what came before. It operates on a different kind of logic entirely. The drone swarm strategy that exhausts a missile-armed warship runs directly into a system that cannot be exhausted by volume alone, and the economics that made saturation attacks attractive stop making sense against it. The Royal Navy has been working on this answer for the better part of a decade. By 2027, 2 of its ships will carry it into operational service. The rest of NATO will be watching those deployments with considerable interest, studying every lesson they produce, and deciding what comes next for their own fleets. Britain got there first, and that is not nothing.